So we're so thrilled to have everyone here this evening. I don't know if everyone knows, this exhibit actually closes tomorrow, so we are here to fully take advantage. This is sort of like a closing event. This amazing exhibit curated by Kris Kuramitsu up there, yes. The exhibit title is Voice a Wild Dream, which borrows its name from Tracy Katsukiriyama's poem, Letters to Taz on Meeting. The poem imagines a shared moment between the grandparents of two poet activists and the solidarity that they might share in their hope for the future. So in this vein, we are so excited to have this beautiful multi-generational panel here. We have Christopher Soto. Their debut poetry collection, Diaries of a Terrorist, released this year, demands the abolition of policing and human caging. We also have Ryan Lee Wong, whose debut novel, Which Side Are You On?, serves as the namesake for this event. We have Lee Wong, a longtime community organizer and activist, and incidentally, Ryan's mom. So before turning it over, we have some thank yous we need to make sure we give. So first, thank you so much to the OXY ARTS team who has done so much to set up, to host this event. Thank you so much. Thank you to our ASL interpreters, Arlene Narvaez and Paula Morales del Castillo. Thank you to our co-sponsor, Stop Discrimination. And thank you also finally to GYOPO's volunteers. We are an entirely volunteer-run organization, so it fully depends on the love and dedication of the volunteers. And if you're interested in joining, please reach out. So I think first we'll have Christopher Soto Loma come up and read a bit.
I don't even know where to start. Ryan, well, I guess I'll start with your mom first. Mrs. Wong, thank you for bringing Ryan into our lives. We all owe you a lot. And so Ryan and I have known each other for about a decade now. Since the New York days, we were involved in literary and activist spaces out there. Ryan, as you all know, is one of the most brilliant thinkers and writers of our generation. I feel confident saying that even though it's your first book. And my little debut got to be a sibling. It's called Diaries of a Terrorist with Ryan, and we read together earlier this summer at my book launch in New York. So it's kind of nice that our friendship from New York to Los Angeles gets to, mirror. We get to have those mirrors. So it's an honor, thank you for allowing me to be part of this space with you here. A lot of the work is informed. I have one poem over here. I don't know if I could say it publicly. Am I allowed to?
You can say it.
Okay, I can say it. When the book came out, there's this long poem at the end, which is a bit of a philosophical meditation on what constitutes as violence and what our responses to violence or non-carceral responses to violence can be. And I tried to unpack that question by looking at 3 ways that my body has been hit: boxing, domestic violence, and through kink, and how depending on the context I have had a different emotional response to these 3 different ways of being hit. So one of my boxing partners in New York was Ryan, and I have a line in that poem that talks about Ryan's nipples. And so Ryan sent me a text and was like, "Great book, never expected my nipples to be in poems." Anyhow, we have a lovely friendship. The role of the poet in abolitionist spaces and abolitionist movements for me is one of interrogating language. I think that poets, we look at particular instances and we say, is this the word that's actually most accurate to describe what is occurring? So for example, when someone is being arrested, is that the right word, or is human kidnapping the correct words to use in that instance? Are people being unwillingly extracted from their social and economic lives? when people are incarcerated, is that the right word, or should we say human caging, and tie it to other lineages of bondage within the United States? So I think one role of the poet in abolitionist spaces is having a particularity with word choice, and I think another role of the poet in abolitionist spaces and movements is thinking about the poetic leap. And by that I mean, a lot of the times as organizers, sometimes we get asked to talk about incrementalist approaches and like strategy that politicians can use to get towards an abolitionist or a post-carceral world. And I think one of the good things as a poet is that we can say, I don't know, I don't care, I'm a poet, we've never been known to be logical, and we get to just leap and jump and imagine the world as we wish it would be. So it's very nice to be a poet in this movement, and to be in this movement. I'm excited about the conversation with Ryan. All right, I'll read maybe 2 poems in your honor. Oh, well, yeah, I'll do these ones. We've been yearning for a riot. The cobras unlocked their jaws into safety pens, picked open the locks of their terrariums and escaped. The penguins threw student loans at women with Prada purses. So upset, the thought of happiness existing anywhere seemed insulting. The albino rhinoceros battered open the cage of his captivity. How he dreamt of a road trip and camping in Yosemite, to walk in the valley and let waterfalls empty their bladders into his mouth. The ram rammed open the gates of his enclosure too. The apricot parrot sang the same song of struggle. Anti-capitalism means the rich can no longer control us with their laws. This whole fucking zoo bursted like a Molotov cocktail when the parrot set flame to the aviary, and then a fly flew onto the spine of a gazelle who was lighting a blunt while resting her hip against the ice cream stand. And the alligators started to pour margaritas. Alligators used to be enemies with a gazelle, but now they're together. They hijacked the stereo and started to dance. De la Bala by Los Hermanos Flores. The pigs, the most anxious of animals, stay locked inside, clutching their badges, hiding in the mud, and waiting for the uproar to pass. Then came the wisp of tranquilizer darts. Humans pushed giraffes whose necks craned into the shape of McDonald's arch, and we couldn't fold back to cornmeals from the trough. We dashed towards freedom. Our cheetah crop top turned us into a cheetah. Our legs were pixelated in quick motion. Catch us if you can. I'll do that, okay. So I was with a friend yesterday watching Black Panther, and I got really sad because I wanted, to have Black Latino unity and everyone, then just like go after everyone. And then they ended up fighting each other, and I was like, fuck, man. This isn't what I wanted. But I don't know how it's on my mind, and I'll read this poem, because maybe it's another poem about me being disappointed with Latinos. It's called Job Opening for Border Patrol Agents. Requirements: U.S. citizenship, 1 year of military or police experience, ability to read and speak Spanglish, education, no college degree required, duties, jugs of rose water slashed open, slit into the shape of a frown, Mexican teenager unarmed but shot, neon burial grounds tumbled through the border, money stolen, medications confiscated, children crammed into overcrowded cells, toilet paper placed on the floor for warmth, one barrier between them and the cold cement. Drugs smuggled by Border Patrol agents. Checkpoints open during the hurricane. Migrants couldn't seek safety without being detained. Surveillance cameras shook through skinhead passports. Border communities patrolled petroleum desires. Believed you were good for doing your job when your job means harming other people. Salary, $40,000 in a raise every year plus overtime. Benefits, infrared scopes for night operations, half price on used lungs, required to carry a firearm, equipped with off-road vehicles, horses, watercrafts, motorcycles, ATVs. Stood before the mirror throwing rocks. How to apply? Send in your name. We promise. Insomniacs have the best daydreams. Full-time, Latinos preferred. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. This really feels like a family event. Loma, my family, the movement families of this exhibition that have, in a literal way, made this book possible. So thank you, Kris, and thank you, OXY ARTS, for hosting this. My new family of GYOPO, thank you so much for reaching out and doing this event together. It is a labor of love to do this, to do an event like this. So the fact that you all are all volunteers is really mind-blowing. And then of course my family friends who are like my family, all the aunties and uncles who have known me since I was a kid or a baby who are out here tonight, thank you for being here. Those of you who I haven't met yet, thank you for being my new family. I hope to get to talk to you tonight. And then of course my literal family, my dad is here, and my mom, who you'll get to hear from in just a sec. So I'm gonna read a little bit, and then we'll have some conversation. Mom caught me shuffling toward the coffee machine. Out with CJ all night, she said, smoking that Mary Jane? She was like an inspector solving a too easy case. I looked at the dull green lines of the stove clock and saw it was past 10, which meant 1 in the afternoon, New York time. I sniffed my shirt, but didn't detect any trace of weed. Mary Jane, I deflected to Mom. Come on. Uh-huh. Mothers know some things. Mom swung her arms in wide arcs from side to side, slapping her shoulders and kidneys with loud thwacks, some ancient Taoist morning routine she'd recently begun. No wonder your grades are slipping, she said. I rubbed my eyes and inserted a capsule into the machine, one of those sleek, pod-based towers that added to the plastic gyre in the ocean with each serving. The inside roared, sending a creamy string of espresso into my cup. I took a sip, and the liquid was eerily rich and fresh, coming from that vacuum-sealed pod. More importantly, my nervous system tingled to life. Smoking is just a form of self-medicating to deal with the anxieties of late capitalism, I said to Mom. It's actually one of the least destructive things I can imagine. Please, said Mom, do what you want. I went to college. You know, this stuff just always made me sleepy. I added this to the sketchy picture I had of Mom's Berkeley years. Thank you for that, Mom. I'll carry forward the family tradition of fighting the man and smoking Mary Jane. Mom wagged her hand at me. I never said you should do it. You slept till 10 and you still look like hell. She pulled down the flesh from under her eyes to illustrate. I'm saying you should learn from your mother's mistakes. She stopped swinging her arms and gestured toward the dining room table. I sat across from her and ran my hands over the dark grain of the wooden top. It was a new addition. A trapezoid of morning light fell across it and caught the steam rising from my coffee cup. The whole thing was ready to Instagram, a perfect image of the bougie comforts Mom had cultivated piece by piece to create catalog-ready images like this. She folded her hands on the table. I don't support your whole idea of dropping out of college, she said, and not just because I'm your mother. I've been there, and it's painful, the whole Black Asian situation. She inhaled as if about to dive underwater. Your mother co-founded something called the Black Korean Coalition in the 1980s to stop all the violence in South Central. My mind lit up, blazing a connection between Mom's words and the half-dozen meetings and teach-ins on Black Asian solidarity we'd done, trying to string together an alternative history, proving that we were more than shopkeepers harassing Black customers, parents suing to overturn affirmative action. But the histories had started to feel a little thin. I thought of all the pictures I'd seen of Yuri Kochiyama, Nisei grandma with her permed hair but wearing a Free Mumia t-shirt, and Grace Lee Boggs, the revolutionary theorist who organized urban farms in Detroit. I'd heard so many spoken word tributes, had watched so many indie documentaries on them that, though I never say so aloud, the attachment was starting to feel a little desperate. They were like exceptions proving the rule of Asian anti-Blackness, lighthouses against a foggy coastline. Mom, I said, wow, we need that story. This had to be related to Rodney King and the LA uprising, right? Saigu, that was 429, the abbreviated Korean name for the April day their stores were set aflame, a low point in our Black Asian timeline. This would totally remake the popular narrative, I said. Maybe you could lead a workshop or a teach-in for us, or we could do an oral history. Wow, my mom gasped. I've never seen my son so eager to talk to me. It's not exactly a happy story. No, of course. I mean, we would have to take a trauma-informed approach. My son, Mom put up a palm to stop me. There are things I'm happy to share with you if they help you to understand what you're doing out there. But I'm not gonna polish it into some toolkit you can circulate to your activist friends. These young organizers always come to me saying, auntie, can you mentor me? And I say to them, first, I'm not your auntie. I'm not that old. And second, what the fuck for? I don't have any answers. Usually they just want someone to listen to their problems. I pictured all of my activist friends saying exactly that. The yearning and eagerness in their faces. And I felt my own desperation, my sudden childlike need. Exactly, I said. It shows how few Asian American activist models we have. Most of my friends' parents and grandparents don't even support Black Lives Matter, let alone teach them movement history. Movement history? God, you make me sound so old, said Mom. She crossed her arms, smug at having the upper hand. Aren't you grateful to have such a cool mother? Please welcome my cool mother, J.J. Wong.
Thank you, my son.
So my first question is, the question that everyone asks me when I do events like this is, what do your parents think? And especially, what does your mom think? So, what do you think of this book?
Well, it's published. Well, so first of all, I'm here as Ryan's mom, not Ree's mom, so just wanted to clarify that. If you have a writer in your family, you should be very, very afraid. You just don't know quite how you are going to show up in one of the books. When Ryan first shared his draft, even prior to reading it, I was very, very nervous and a little worried because I knew he was writing something that I was going to be in it, but didn't know exactly how that was going to be. And so the first draft was harder actually to read because I kept thinking, oh my God. But I had actually the opportunity to read it with the different iterations for several times. And with the latest one that you have, I am understanding the spirit in which the book was written. And I'm actually very grateful and honored to be part of it. And I think if I could speak for Dad, I think he will share some of the similar feelings, that this is an important story to be told.
Yeah, thank you for
So
that.
thank you.
So because we're, in an exhibition that honors movement histories and kind of, people have asked me how much of this book is fiction, how much is based on real life. And Kathy Park Hong, who is a big supporter of the book, suggested the term to me, documentary fiction. So all of the historical events are very closely based on history, and that was very important to me. Both what happened in the 1980s in South LA and also the Peter Liang Akai Gurley case are both historical events. So I'm wondering, Mom, if you could say a little bit about what the Black Korean Alliance was and how you became involved.
Sure. I was working at UCLA Asian American Studies Center, and we were actually organizing very first Korean American conference at the time. Was back in what year would be 1990s, 1980s, and one of the panel was on rise of what we felt was tension between Korean merchants in South LA and Black residents. Los Angeles Sentinel, which was the community newspaper, started covering about the rising tension between the shopkeepers and the residents, and we felt that was a very serious concern that both communities really needed to talk about, and so that was the beginning. And then a few months later, I learned that there was a job opening at the LA County Human Relations Commission where you get paid to do this kind of work. So I applied and got a job, and so I went to work at the LA County Human Relations Commission with a really explicit interest in working on Black Korean relations. So I was partnered with a colleague named Larry Aubrey, who has since passed, and he and I formed a Black Korean Alliance. And the idea was that we needed to start with education and dialogue between two communities, because so much of the tension was based on misunderstanding and then just buying into stereotypes that we have of each other. So we started doing organizing. Was really literally door by door with stores, Korean-owned stores in South LA, and then really door by door with African-American churches and some of the civil rights leaders at that time. In the beginning, there was a lot of resistance and denial from both communities, and we actually got a lot of pushback. By framing or by talking about the problems, are we not really bringing more attention to the problems? So let it just die. But we felt that that just doesn't work that way. So we continue to work and formed the Black Korean Alliance, which has been, went on for several years prior to the civil unrest.
So, part of what formed this book was me sitting you down and asking you about that history for the first time. And there's so many amazing stories and things you did during then, but I'm wondering if you could maybe share one moment or issue that was more difficult, and maybe a moment or issue that gave you a lot of hope at the time, and yeah.
Jeez, there are lots. So first I want to say that one of the reflections that I've had and I've been thinking about is, I've been wondering if just framing as a Black Korean Alliance or Black Korean relations, are we not falling into maybe the problem itself? So in some ways, I think that we continue to have this problem where it's a Latino Black, Asian Black, you know what I mean? So we are constantly framing as if we are the perpetrators and the victims of each other, and that's the larger racism of the hook. So I want to just share that because I've been thinking a lot more about it, and it just kind of bothers me. Difficulties, the challenges were, I would say, I just want to share that the day the verdict came out, I was on a panel at Cal State LA with Larry Aubrey, who I work with. And one of the questions that came from the audience was that what's a rebellion? Something like that happened in LA. And both of us responded by saying, this time it'll be a lot bigger and much more serious and more devastating. And so we left the panel. Back then, we only had payphones, so it was a while ago. We were calling to the office and ran into a Los Angeles Times reporter on the payphone hogging up the line, and he was just screaming, and he said the verdict came. So the plan was that we're going to all meet at First AME Church. And so Larry and I, of course, LA style, we drove separately, so we were going to meet at the First AME Church on Adams. And so we drove there. I parked the car because I couldn't get close to the church. And because a lot of people are out on the street. And I parked the car a few blocks from the church, started walking. And I saw the faces of people and their eyes. And it was just, I thought, I am just not gonna make it back home if I kept on walking. Because there was just that look of just anger, confusion, just the frustration. And I thought, well, here I am, a Korean woman walking in South LA. It just wasn't a good idea. Got back on the car and went back. Went to Koreatown Plaza, and everybody, was watching. I mean, a few people that were there. And the liquor store that we had actually, resolved some of the tension was burning when I was watching. So that was the moment where I felt that everything I had worked for just came crumbling and just literally burning. So that was just kind of emotional and yeah.
Did you want to share like a happy story? Or a
Sure. So I think that the happy story are, first of all, I think that the effort we made had impact, right? Obviously, there were a number of, progresses that were made. There were more exchanges and conversations between two communities. But to me, the most rewarding part of this work has really been the relationships that I built. And particularly with the African-American leaders that came forward, because they were it was not a popular thing to do for either side for us to be talking. And those friendships and the mutual respect and trust goes back. And I am very proud to say one of which was Karen Bass, who started the Community Coalition, who's our next mayor. So in organizing, I think it's always about that human connection and the relationship that just goes back. So that I would say is a happy story.
Yeah. So I thought it would only be fair, since I wrote this whole book, to allow you to ask me anything you want, or put me on the spot. Or if there's anything you want to share about that, yeah.
So, I had the advantage of reading different versions of the book. And so they have changed, from the first copy to the second and the final. So I want to ask you to share what were some of the changes that you made, and what were some of the reflections as you were making those changes. And particularly, I know that you have been living in the monastery and practicing, so just talk a little bit about whether if that was an influence or not. And related to that is, I noticed that each of the versions, mother figure is cussing a lot more than prior to us. You could say something about that too.
My imagination took off. I just wanted something purely fictional to balance out all the documentary elements, so the cussing is just something I made up for the record. Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you for reading all the drafts. So I sent my parents the first draft right after I signed with an agent. So I was working on this for years, and for most of that I was like, I don't know if this is ever gonna see the light of day. I don't know if anyone's gonna publish a book about There's like this intergenerational Asian American activist story, like no one even knows Asian Americans have been organizers. Is this interesting? Anyway, I would say the main thing that changed from the drafts even before you saw is that I had to learn, it's kind of paradoxical, both to get to more painful places, emotionally and historically. So really letting the characters, and especially the narrator, read, screw up and be bad and like make mistakes, because that's what we do as humans. And most writers, including me, have this impulse to like protect the characters. So I had to like let him go there. And then paradoxically, I also had to build more compassion for Reed, for the mother character, for everyone involved, for the Korean Americans and Asian Americans who are on the other side, quote unquote. So I think if there's like one main thing that changed from draft to draft, it was holding that paradoxical shift, both more pain and more compassion. You know.
Thank you.
What was it like for you to read that first draft, and then, you know, did it bring up any surprises or any new reflections?
Well, you know, when you kind of see your character in black and white, it's kind of hard. You know, it's like, wow, do I cuss that much? You know, so I think that it helped me to have a couple of years from the first time I read it to finally seeing the book. That there is a time to also digest, but also to have a little bit more distance. So I was able to read it as a reader, and so that really helped, and that I was able to appreciate it more. And of course, I'm very proud. So that's.
Yeah, I mean, when it is fictionalized, of course, this character is fictionalized, and of course, because the documentary element, so much of it is based on the stories you shared, and I know it was asking a lot to put it out there in a public way, but I think if the response so far has shown anything, and all of the people of different generations, that was surprising, coming up and saying that this book meant something to them, it really is because you were willing to do that, and you had done the work to even get to the place of sharing your stories with me. So I want to acknowledge and thank you for that.
Thank you. And thank you for writing.
I'm going to invite Loma back, and I'm going to ask you both a question or two, and then it's open for, I know people in the audience have questions, so think of those. But one connection we all share is my mom brought me boxing first, and then like Loma brought me boxing in New York, like exercise boxing. And like I've been talking about you two to each other for years. But one thing I want to ask is like, why boxing? And more generally, you know, okay, Mom, one of the things you always said was living well is the best revenge. So what does that mean to you? And you know, how do you live well? Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, you know, I'm in my 60s, so, you know, it is much more serious question. And, you know, having gone through activist stage and really like running myself to the ground, and when I was younger, and just realizing that, you know, the balance is important. So I do spend a fair amount of time trying to have more balanced life. I do feel that younger generation do that a lot better than we did. You know, health, family, spending time with those who you love is becoming more precious and important. And also I'm trying to get back to having stillness and time to meditate, which is important. So those things. But yeah, and then you'll need to talk about boxing.
Sure.
So boxing, you know, I was actually not thinking I was going to do it. My girlfriend, Diana, said, you know, there's this boxing studio opening up, and do you want to go? And I thought, boxing? Us? I'm kind of old to be going boxing. So we did. We went boxing, and loved it. Loved it. You sweat like crazy. But you have to focus, right? You really have to focus one shot at a time, and your, you know, leg movement. And it's something just really just great about sweating and working really hard and feeling just, you know, just letting go. I mean, I think each time I was letting go, and actually I think one time we had this joke that I would just, sometimes I punch and think of somebody I was angry at. And I go, so-and-so, this is for you. So-and-so, this is for you. You know, that kind of stuff. But then anyway, so, you know,
Ryan and I have had this exact combo, because when we were boxing, you know, they were like, who are you thinking of on the bag? And I was all like, my dad, I was like going through like my list of people who I don't enjoy having time with. And I was like, all right, Ryan, I don't know how to help the echo, but I was like, Ryan, who are you thinking of when you're approaching the bag? And this is a testament to the child that you raised, or the person that you raised. Ryan was like, I wasn't boxing people, I was boxing concepts. Beautiful. So I'm here like, I'm like here with my daddy problems, and Ryan's on the bag like white supremacy. And it's really, I think the answer has really informed also how I approach a lot of my movement work and my problems in the world too, because I come to people who I may disagree with and will have personal differences, but I try and think about, oh, we're actually like disagreeing on particular concepts. It's not that person. It's not like one attribute or feeling or thought like makes that whole person, quote, bad. I mean, that's the logic of the carceral state, right? But when I think about boxing with you too, it's like when people ask what is the space of the writers, like our conversations before and after boxing is where the book gets produced. So it's like, it's not even like just that we're writing on, you know, our computer and there's the book. It's like some of my most pivotal creative moments have been around boxing and eating, and you've done a lot of work to help me interrogate Chicano Latino activist histories, and also Chicano Latino activist histories in relationship to Asian American communities. And I want to bring in some of the legacies that I didn't know before talking to you. So for example, like Asian American and Chicano Latino communities working together around the Delano grape stripes. Like, as someone who grew up in California, why did I not know that Asian American and Chicano Latino community people were organizing together in the Delano grape stripes? And then talking about the Asian American Studies Center, I brought that conversation with Ryan. I also work at UCLA with the Ethnic Studies Research Center, so I brought that conversation into the Asian American Studies Center. And I was like, where are all of these histories of interracial and interethnic solidarity? And then I was like, do you happen to know any examples of American Indian indigenous populations co-organizing with Asian American populations? And they're all like, our centers. And I was all like, what do you mean? And previously at UCLA, there was a moment where the ethnic study centers, research centers were moving their hubs on campus. And you could, I don't know if you were around during those years, you could tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But the American Indian Studies Center was upset with the university administration because they were housing indigenous human remains in this particular building where they were moving ethnic studies, our ethnic studies research centers. And the American Indian Studies Center said, we do not want to move into that building while the university is holding American Indian and indigenous remains. And then an act of solidarity, the Asian American Studies Center said, we are also not moving. And folks who know ethnic studies at UCLA is American Indian Studies Center is much smaller, Asian American Studies Center is much larger, and so the weight of having, you know, the Asian American and Asian American Pacific Islander community, you know, in that moment, it holds a lot of weight. And that's something that even if we think about this year, if you look, there was a recent, I forget what it was called, but the Asian American Studies Center and the American Indian Studies Center, again, this year we're working together to create deliverables specifically around Pacific Islanders. And I don't want to butcher those details, but there's news about that and those two centers working together this year as well. So thank you for bringing those histories into my forefront, which make me kind of, and I think that's what your book does, is draw a lot of these untold Asian American or interracial or interethnic histories that our communities need to thrive.
Thank you for that.
Can we ask you questions? We talk too much.
No, okay. Okay, yeah, ask me a question and then we'll open it to the audience. Yeah.
Okay, you spent the last few years on a monastery. You know I love this question, but can you tell us a little bit about the relationship between abolition or policing and Buddhism?
Yeah, so, you know, Lom and I have talked a lot about the intersection of like faith and abolition or spiritual practices and a world without cages. And one thing that being in Sangha, which is the Buddhist word for community, it goes back to the time of the Buddha, is that it's a practice in creating a community built on ethics, but that doesn't rely on punishing people when people inevitably misbehave. So what does it mean to actually like vow to like live ethically and also not harm or exile people when they don't abide by those ethics? Because every single day, you know, every single morning at the temple, we'd get up and we'd take the vows again, you know, vowing to do wholesome, vowing not to do unwholesome, vowing to live for the benefit of all beings. These impossible vows, literally impossible vows, which are just this compass that guide us towards freedom. And then when ethical things arise in community, we all sit down and talk about it. And there's a teacher to help guide that person, there's a community to hold it. So it's, you know, obviously a very small laboratory, it's a little experiment in that, but it's one that's 2,500 years old and that has actually offered a model to many people for building and living a more just world. And that experience, you know, I finished this novel when I was at the temple. I finished it in summer of 2020. Well, I was up there and I was watching the George Floyd protests, and I don't think this book would have been the way it is without that practice. Thank you for that, yeah. Okay, I'd love to hear from you all. Don't be shy. I know the people in this room. I know you have questions.
I asked you, Ryan, when I said hello, if you were working on number 2, and you told me a lot of thoughts. So something's percolating. Could you talk about your writing process, if you outline, but just how you know when you're ready to write and begin?
Yeah, sure. With this novel in particular, it was, the best way I can describe it is I was haunted by this history. You know, I was out there in 2015, 2016 around the Peter Liang and Kai Gurley case in which, again, the media was talking about Black and Asian communities being at odds and do they understand each other and like, and of course, what little I knew of my mom's history at the time came forward. And I was like, okay, something deep is going on here. This cycle of history is going on here. So I actually didn't like identify as a fiction writer at the time, but I knew I had to do this. So it's a weird way to answer the process question, but it was like, I had to learn to write fiction to write the story I knew I needed to tell. And so I went and like got an MFA, I did all these workshops. You know, the first few drafts were like really unreadable, but I got through that because I knew on some level there was a story here that was worth it. And now that like this first book is out, I do feel, I feel no shortage of other things that are haunting me, and that are like these big social, generational, emotional questions that even if I like spent 10 years working on them and they never were published, they would still be worth working on.
What was the process like when learning about your parents' past experiences? From when you were younger? Because I feel like for some people's childhoods, we don't really know our parents' histories, or what they were like when they're younger, to that discovery. What was that like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Mom, if you want to share anything about your parenting philosophy here, you're welcome that. So my parents kind of made the active choice not to like tell me all the stuff when I was a kid. But there would always be like little hints here and there. And like I knew they were both very active in the community. But like I would be like, hey, like why do we have this old copy of like Marx in the, like, you know? Or like, why do we have like all these old CDs that are like really political and down? And they'd be like, oh, you know, like the old days. But like, I didn't know what that meant. Like the movement days, the old days. And then, I really actually had to be ready to meet and hear those histories. I had to grow up enough to like ask the right questions. And, I think my parents and my mom, in order to like tell me those stories, had also done a lot of work internally to like narrativize, like put words to some very painful and difficult experiences. So in a way, like this book is like a classic Asian American story, which is like, who the hell are my parents? Like, why are they like that? But in particular, like with the political history, a lot of these activist organizing histories are very painful because this country is not kind to progressives, to leftists. So that's what it took to have that meeting, like both sides doing the work.
Sure. So when, one of the things that we wanted to raise kids with a lot of love and support. And, personally, I didn't have a lot of that, so I was much more mindful, whereas Kent grew up with lots of love and support. And one of the things that I noticed when we were politically active, some of our friends are older, and so their children are always forced to go to all these meetings. And then, we'll be meeting, and they'll be falling asleep under the tables, and they're just dragging kids to all these things, and there was a lot of joke that they'll turn out to be Republicans because, and I just, we really didn't want to force our children to do that, but we also were pretty open about, all the demonstrations, politics, and I remember that when Ryan was little, we used to always talk about people's race, so it's black, brown, or, so he used to say, he'll come home and say, so-and-so is yellow, so-and-so is brown, and I thought, well, this is interesting, he's already getting it. But then one day he said, oh no, he's purple. I was like, purple? He said, yeah, purple shirt. So he was identifying people not by race as much as the kind of shirts or the color of clothes they were wearing. They happened to be black and brown and yellow. So that's when we realized he was picking up things, but we weren't explaining what that was. So that was just one of the examples. I do think that there's no such a thing as perfect way to raise kids. I mean, we all try our best to be good parents, but I think the best thing is to try, do your best. And I feel that part of the political, how we chose to discuss politics was part of that choice of, showing a lot of love and support. And that also that our political activism is the something that comes out of our love and passion. And initially, I think in an earlier stage, that was more driven by anger and frustration. So I think that process for me was important in being able to share with Ryan about my own evolution of politics.
I have one that I kind of want to ask, if it's okay. I've been trying to think of how to not do spoilers. There are moments where in your strives for, quote, justice or liberation, or racial equity, or whatever we want to call it, sometimes means, like, going against masses of who you may superficially or may authentically consider your community. And so I'm wondering, like, I don't know what the question is there. Like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah.
Tensions into a community when trying to show up for racial equity?
I'm going to ask you the same question next. So the title of the book is Which Side Are You On? And that comes from, you might know it, which side are you on? Which side are you on? Yeah, do it with me. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Yeah. And so that was a song that came out of a Kentucky miners' strike. It's almost 100 years old. And why I like this title was that in moments of crisis, in moments of struggle, you have to ask that question. My friend actually just texted me today because he's a grad student at UCLA, and he was picketing, and someone had like scrawled it in huge chalk letters on campus, which side are you on? It's this perennial question. And in moments where someone's gonna break your strike, in moments where there's a moment of like community crisis, of policing, of you have to ask that. And my personal feeling is at the exact same time, we are completely interconnected as a community, as people, as across that line, whatever it is, we are completely dependent upon each other and completely with each other, which doesn't negate that we still have to choose sides. And it's not something that you can hold intellectually. Like the brain actually can't hold both of those at the same time, but you can in your heart. Like when you approach things from a place of compassion, you can actually recognize that I disagree with this person and that person's opinion is potentially violent, and I am deeply connected and interconnected with that person.
I really like that answer because I think in a way it like strives for a particular sort of like resolve while still acknowledging that like this question of which side are you on creates almost a false binary. So I say that because I'm thinking about our earlier conversation about interfaith dialogues, and I was like, there's a whole bunch of like people of like various Christian denominations who have been involved in anti-carceral movements. Even, maybe 5 years ago, I was working with an organization that had coalitions with evangelicals. And at large, not on the side of evangelicals in a lot of issues, but we were organizing together, against the death penalty. And so I really appreciated the kind of the fineness of being able to decide, be able to be like, yes, I'm on your side. And there's always ambiguities in various ways where we're also going to come into conflict as well. It makes things feel a little bit less like they're stuck in a binary or a little less static, your approach, so I really appreciate that. Am I allowed to ignore the question?
That was good.
Perfect.
I just want to really thank you for this event. I didn't know about your book until GYOPO sent out an email about it. Just seeing a practitioner of creating personal history as artwork is always really beautiful, and to see the two of you together is really touching. And I guess I'm asking more of a practice question of like, I'm now in month 7 very personal to him that he has no need to be accountable for or to take on the full responsibility of owning the authorship of, because so many of us are more surviving history than thinking of authoring it. So I just was curious throughout the long process for you and your mother of just any kind of challenges you came across that were unexpected in this dialogue of the transference of history, and then deeper into the artist's practice of forming that into a novel.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's profound. I'm just taking a moment. And Lo, I also invite you if you want responses, because you write about family and intimate relations. And Mom, obviously, if you have thoughts about this. So, yeah, I really appreciate what you're naming, because one of the things I came up against with early in this project was, in particular with me, learning more about my mom's story was also necessarily learning the story of Korea and the Korean diaspora in the 20th century. And those are inextricable. And one of the things that Reed, the narrator in the novel, learns is exactly that. That here he has all these theories, he has all these ideas, but until this moment, he's never actually looked inward at what formed him. And I went through a similar process. And the reason for that, I believe, for myself, is as soon as you scratch the surface of, as soon as you look at all at that Korean diasporic history, there's an immense amount of pain. There's an immense amount of violence. And a lot of that violence gets blamed on or placed on individuals. So like, oh, my family is fucked up, or oh, my friend is really messed up. When in fact we're talking about a century of really brutal war and colonialism, largely perpetuated by this country, America. And so as soon as you start to go there, it feels like endless to me. It felt like this endless pain. And so, it's hard to imagine myself writing this book without practice, without, for me, Buddhist practice, but really without something that allows one to hold and meet very painful things without feeling the need to either repress or transfer that pain, if that makes sense. So to be grounded and expansive and still with even the hardest things. And I will say also that, I think on some level I did trust that if I did that, and if I really expressed artistically from a place of honesty and vulnerability, which I hope I did in this book, that my parents would get it. My mom would see that. That I wasn't trying to score a point, I wasn't trying to make a certain issue, make a certain point, but that I was actually just trying to bring my subjective, honest view towards those histories.
Yeah, that's a very deep question. And so, I think that the point that Ryan made about how to sit with truth and not make it personal, I think is really important. And so for me, I have a sister. So if you talk to my sister, she comes from a completely different family than I do. So one of us is right, we kind of see it very differently. And it took me a really long time. I had a lot of conflicts with my mother, and she was a single mother, abused. by my father, and but she is the one who brought us here to this country. She worked as a maid, and she sent her 3 children to college, and she worked 2 jobs. Yet I was always angry at her because it was never enough, right? And that she will never say positive things. If I came home with 1 B, that's what she fixated on, So it was just kind of growing up with a lot of conflicts, and it really took me very, very long time to understand, accept the way she was not just that she was like that, but that whole generation of Koreans were. They went through Japanese occupation, they went through Korean War, and they yet again came to this country, right? And in my mother's case, as a single woman, so, and that she had to make so much sacrifices. So when I understood her story and her experience in the context of a larger system and our history, then I was able to understand her much better and to accept and appreciate. But the problem is, it took me a very long time. I was much, much older to get there. And, so by then she was aging. And, so I would, and I actually do this work with some young women of color. And we actually use this methodology of storytelling as a liberation. So we talk about our stories, like where do you come from? What are your names? Who are your grandparents' names, And that we keep talking about it to a point where you start owning your own story and your intergenerational history, and that you start understanding. So the minute you could tell the truth, I think that's where, to me, the liberation starts.
So just to say, I think that's a beautiful place to end. Thank you, GYOPO, for making this space for our stories. Thank you, Loma, for sharing yours. And thank you, Mom, for owning and sharing your story.
Thank you, Ryan. Congratulations.